So one of the interesting things we're seeing a lot of within the Book of Boba Fett is Boba's perceived connection with the Grand Army of the Republic, the massive force of clones the Republic deployed during the Clone Wars. So I figured today we could take a look at one of the periods that they actually would have shared in common, early life on Kamino. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So both the clone troopers and, to a lesser extent, Boba Fett grew up on Kamino before the outbreak of the Clone Wars. And, well, after war broke out, Boba ended up among the bounty hunters out in the galaxy. Before the conflict, he would have grown up among a sea of himself, seeing identical twins of himself all throughout the facility. In fact, I would wager that a lot of the sort of home life experiences of the clone troopers growing up on Kamino were shared with Boba Fett. So I figured today we could take a little bit of a look at exactly what life would have been like for a growing clone trooper on Kamino. So let's just jump right into it with where this whole scheme begins, in the sort of birthing pods we see in those massive Kaminoan hulls. This is where very early life would take place. As a clone trooper, you are basically born in these pods and go through the entire beginning of your development there. Now, it's not entirely certain whether they were actually birthed from the pods 9 months, or I guess in the case of clone troopers, 4.5 months after they were whatever conceived would be for clone troopers, or whether they were left in the pods through the entire sort of infant stage of life. But ultimately, at some point, they are released from the pods and begin their basic training. Now, in the Grand Army of the Republic, those first couple years outside of the pod were likely very bland, spending your days mostly learning the basic concepts that the universe functions on. Think of this sort of like elementary school. You're not really learning anything very specific, just general facts and knowledge, and likely only in very specific fields, things that would be necessary for fighting a war. After all, these clones are being bred to man a military, and there likely wasn't a lot of thought going into what these clones are going to do after their military service. So I would imagine this education focused a lot on history, the history of the Republic, basic mathematics, and maybe some science. There was also likely a lot of information in that course on the military equipment utilized by the Grand Army of the Republic, so that by the time they were of age to serve in the military, they would already have a long-standing knowledge of the military equipment they would be serving alongside of. By this point, they would probably begin forming bonds with one another, which may even eventually become units and squads when they're old enough and deployed into combat. However, the real combat training and preparation for war itself really kicks in probably in their sort of teenage years, where these clone troopers would be pressed into combat simulations, things designed to sort of simulate the environment of a battlefield. We know that the facilities on Kamino could replicate a wide variety of environments and train clones for everything from the icy fields of Hoth to the dusty battlefields on Geonosis. We know that this also likely incorporated a lot of holographic simulations to sort of replicate a changing enemy in the rising separatist faction. It's around this period in their lives that they would be assigned to a unit and a squad and could start familiarizing themselves with the other clones that they were going to go into battle with, and many would likely die with. We do know that this sort of level of combat training continues basically all the way up to the point when they sort of graduate from this education on Kamino, at which point their squad or unit is assigned its position within the greater structure of the Grand Army of the Republic, and they are sent off to fight in the Clone Wars. But while it is almost certain that this training took up a vast majority of the time these young clone troopers had, they likely still did have periods of time when they weren't actively training. I would imagine during their later years, clones were heavily encouraged to socialize with the troopers in their squads that would later become their brothers in combat. And it's likely the bonds we see these clone troopers have on the battlefield weren't actually formed in the classrooms and training environments of Kamino, but instead the hallways, mess halls, and barracks of that same world. All of this culminates with them finally marching on to an Acclimator-class assault ship and venturing out into the galaxy to fight the Republic's battles, and later the Empire's battles. And for a lot of clones, their training ended the day the Separatist Crisis boiled over into the Clone Wars. If you'd like to learn about the Separatist Crisis, which ultimately led to the Clone Wars, I'll leave a link up here to my video on that. And I want you to let me know down in the comments whether you think you could deal with the life that these young clone troopers were subject to. Could you deal with school taking up 90% of your time and everything being so regimented and structured? And if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in Star Wars, leave it down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.